Jackie is a preschool teacher in the town. Tonight, on her way home, she unexpectedly found one of her students lying in a ditch. She used all her strength to pull Kevin out of the water. Then she quickly called the police and emergency services. But by then, Kevin had long since stopped breathing. His body was ice cold. Jackie's mind went blank. By the time she regained her senses, she was at Kevin's doorstep. She carefully recounted what had happened to his parents. The news came so suddenly that they couldn't accept it. But thinking of their son's cold body still lying by the ditch, they were overwhelmed with grief. They rushed to the scene. Jackie stayed behind to care for the other children in the house. The town's local police force was only at the grassroots level and lacked the capacity to investigate murders. By regulation, the case could only be handled by a higher authority from outside the town. When the homicide detective arrived after receiving the report, the couple was embracing Kevin's body, weeping uncontrollably. Detective Eric continuously comforted them, promising to uncover the truth. They agreed to temporarily set aside and wait. The forensic doctor reported to Eric that the first person to discover the body was Jackie. Hearing that name, Eric's expression became somewhat strained. Jackie left after the couple arrived home. She walked slowly into a dense forest. Looking at the dilapidated swing set before her, she felt utterly exhausted. She leaned against a large tree trunk. Kevin's death had brought back the most painful memories deep within her. Her niece, Jackie, had disappeared 3 years earlier. The little girl was also wearing a red outfit like Kevin's. The next morning, she walked home listlessly. Eric had waited for her all night in the police car parked outside. But when she saw that familiar face, she was startled. She hurried inside and locked the door. Eric was awakened by the sound of the door closing. He realized Jackie must have come home, so he wanted to go in and give a statement. But he rang the doorbell for a long time, and she still didn't open. He had to give up temporarily and go back to the crime scene to supervise the investigation. The assistant reported to Eric that besides finding a suspicious fingerprint at the scene, he had also learned from Kevin's parents that on the morning of the crime, Kevin had worn a pair of blue rain boots to school, but they still hadn't found them. Furthermore, the water in the ditch should have been fresh water, but the pH test showed it to be seawater. While Eric was questioning the assistant, he turned around and saw a buoy used to measure seawater depth. Why was it near the ditch? In short, the anomalies of the current clues all suggested that Kevin's death was probably not an accident. Therefore, Eric went to find Jackie to give a statement. At this time, she was organizing a water game for the students in her class. Near the sandbank, a boy named James, unable to go into the water due to bee stings, sat silently on the rocks, observing from a distance. Eric asked a few questions and learned that James was Kevin's best friend. He immediately abandoned his intention to question Jackie and turned his attention to James. The innocent child didn't hide anything from the stranger. He told Eric that after school, their favorite thing was to go to Bevon's farm. Bevon was Kevin's grandfather and treated the children very warmly. Not far away, Jackie angrily ran over and loudly reprimanded Eric for questioning a child without an adult present. She urged James to quickly find the other teachers to gather them, completely ignoring Eric's request to take his statement. After being chased away by Jackie, Eric went to the owner of the marker post and asked him a few questions about it. The alibi at the time of the crime, the purpose of the ditch, and why there was seawater inside. The man explained that he was an employee of the Environmental Research Institute. This stake was commonly used to measure the rise and fall of sea levels. Perhaps one day, while on duty nearby, he had accidentally dropped it, and it remained there all day on the day of the crime. He was busy attending a meeting until around 8 o'clock in the evening. Everyone could testify to him. The ditch was also for draining rainwater flowing down from the mountaintop, then channeling it throughout the town to prevent excessive disturbance that could affect the safety of the residents. As for why there was seawater, he found it hard to believe, considering the sea was at least 2 kilometers away from the ditch. The interrogation ended as the sun was about to set. Eric found Jackie walking around town and insisted that she give a statement. Seeing how insistent he was, she reluctantly agreed to tell him everything that happened that night. She added that because the ditch was so muddy, even standing was difficult. She had tried to protect Kevin's body, inadvertently leaving a fingerprint nearby. Then, Eric asked her why she informed Kevin and his wife first, because such matters should usually be handled by the police. In fact, 3 years ago, Jackie didn't live the life she does now. Her eldest sister had married early. Her second sister, after divorcing, brought her daughter back to town. Jackie was once the captain of the serious crime unit and Eric's partner. The 3 sisters took turns caring for their elderly father. Life went on quite peacefully. She had the best relationship with her second sister and treated her niece as her own daughter. But then, one day, her niece suddenly disappeared mysteriously. Under immense pressure, grief, and helplessness, she inadvertently told the inspector that her older sister shouldn't have argued with her niece. Unexpectedly, a simple complaint complaint was taken as testimony by Eric. He suspected Jackie's older sister of heartlessly murdering her daughter after the argument, thus making her a suspect in the murder. Although she was eventually cleared of the accusation, Jackie's older sister still blamed Jackie for the false accusation. Their sisterly relationship fractured. Jackie also resented her sister, so she decided to quit her job and return to town to become a teacher. Currently, Jackie still harbors resentment towards her brother. He continues to avoid the topic, turning his head to look out at the heavy rain outside the window. There was not a single apology. That night, Jackie returned home. After completing the autopsy report, the forensic doctor called to inform him that the initial assessment indicated Kevin's cause of death was drowning, but strangely the fluid in the boy's lungs was fresh water, not seawater. Meanwhile, a water sample taken from the ditch tested seawater, so only one possibility remained. The ditch wasn't the initial crime scene. Someone had murdered Kevin, then moved the body to make it look like an accident. Hearing this, the police officer rushed back to the scene in the pouring rain, wanting to use the time before the rain washed away the evidence to check if anything had been overlooked. The light from his flashlight illuminated a hidden drainage pipe that stretched into the darkness, seemingly without end. At the same time, Jackie, lost in her memories, took out a dusty pink box from her house, covered in 3 years' worth of dirt. Inside were all of her belongings. Her niece had found a watercolor painting inside and suddenly felt a tingling sensation on her scalp. The painting depicts a mysterious figure in protective gear, and just before Kevin was murdered, the boy had drawn an identical picture. That morning, Eric went to question a strange man in town. He was an extreme environmentalist. On the day of the murder, Thursday, he had been shouting environmental slogans. When he arrived at preschool, the children didn't like him much, especially Kevin. The boy had argued with him directly. The man grabbed Kevin's arm and warned him not to yell at him. Eric asked where he had gone after the argument. His sister immediately chimed in, saying that the town had held a meeting on Thursday, the same meeting the man with the marker had attended. Due to the increasingly serious storm surge, all the residents had gathered to discuss whether to relocate or continue building higher seawalls. This eccentric man was also present. Everyone could testify for him. While the three were talking, a particular painting on the wall caught their attention. It was the painting The Sorrows of a Famous Artist. Amidst the white snow, a mother sheep stood guard over her lambs, their heads tilted back, letting out a silent, heart-wrenching cry. A flock of crows surrounded them, staring longingly at the meat and milk. This painting simultaneously depicted the greatness and despair of the mother and served as a metaphor for the law of survival. The police held a meeting about the case at their field office. The assistant reorganized all the clues. At 3:30 p.m. on Thursday, Kevin and James left school after turning a corner and disappeared. James didn't return home until 5 p.m. Kevin's body was found in the ditch at 7:30 p.m. He had lost a pair of blue rain boots in the saltwater ditch, but he had died from freshwater drowning. After hearing his assistant's report, Eric added that although the town lacked surveillance cameras, making it impossible to pinpoint the initial crime scene, it could be inferred that the killer transported the body along the walkway that the road crossed. The swamp from the town led directly to the residential area on the island at the top of the map. Based on the two identical paintings, Jackie concluded that her niece's disappearance 3 years prior was connected to Kevin's murder. She went to James's house. The person who opened the door was James's mother, also Jackie's best friend. Moreover, James's uncle was Jackie's secret lover. In this small town, it seemed everyone was entangled in complex relationships. After obtaining the adult's permission, Jackie took out Kevin's painting and asked James if he had ever seen a mysterious person in protective gear. Without hesitation, the boy replied that it was a beekeeper living on Spider Island. It was said that this man had even given Kevin a gift of water. Hearing this name, Jackie knew that in the case of her niece's disappearance 3 years ago, the beekeeper was the prime suspect. There had been witnesses who had seen him near the swing where her niece used to sit. Eric learned this from the man with the marker post, that the drainage pipe extending from the crime scene originated from Spider Island on the coast. Meanwhile, Jackie asked Bevon's niece to take her to the island by boat. She crossed through the withered trees and found the beekeeper's wooden house. Taking advantage of the fact that no one was around, she sneaked inside to look for clues, but unexpectedly, the beekeeper returned early. He was accompanied by Kevin's mother. Before she could understand why Kevin's mother had come to Spider Island, the door of the wooden house was flung open. The man who entered was Eric. Both were extremely surprised to see each other again. Although Eric was furious that Jackie had interfered in the investigation, he couldn't bring himself to actually arrest her for trespassing. Instead, he used his body to block the beekeeper's view and asked them both to go to the police station to talk. Immediately after they left, Jackie noticed the pile of clothes on the sofa and was shocked to find a child-sized protective suit among them. Back in town, Jackie told Dany that it was very likely Kevin Kevin had met the beekeeper before his death. Unexpectedly, Dany vehemently denied it immediately, then fell into uncontrollable grief. It turned out that years ago, Dany and the beekeeper had had a secret affair. Jackie understood Dany's emotions and realized something even more ironic. After saying goodbye to Dany, Jackie returned to the crime scene and once again coincidentally encountered Eric, who was investigating. Eric had just finished questioning the beekeeper and temporarily concluded that he was not a suspect. However, Jackie reminded Eric that the child-sized protective suit in the beekeeper's cabin was highly suspicious. She also showed him 2 watercolor paintings drawn 3 years apart, one 2 days before her niece disappeared and another 2 days before Kevin's death. This could at least confirm that both children had seen someone wearing protective gear. Beekeepers are required to wear protective gear when tending their bees, but Eric ignored her warnings and instead ordered her not to interfere with the investigation anymore. The next day, the forensic team reported the latest autopsy results to Eric. They found a short brown hair on Kevin's body. However, after comparing it to the database, there was still no match. In addition, there was a bruise on the back of Kevin's neck from a finger. The boy was held underwater until he suffocated to death. Traces of rubber fibers left by his struggles were found under his fingernails. However, no DNA was found on the perpetrator, suggesting he likely wore protective clothing and rubber gloves. Furthermore, traces of sodium hydroxide were found in the boy's eyes, and his nose and mouth showed signs of inflammation from burns caused by the chemical. Such a high concentration of caustic soda is typically only found in landfills. Jackie's brother-in-law was in charge of the town's seawall construction. Eric had gone to the construction site to obtain a list of workers to ensure each worker had an alibi. At the time of the incident on Thursday, James's uncle also worked there and had a prior conviction for CP theft. Jackie's brother-in-law admitted he understood the police would prioritize investigating those with criminal records, but he assured that James's uncle was an honest man. Furthermore, on the day of the crime, he had specifically kept James's uncle at the construction site to handle the delivery. Therefore, this person was not involved in the murder. Also that afternoon, the local residents held a memorial service for Kevin. The main officiant was Bevon's maternal grandfather. In this town, Bevon owned the largest family with 3 children and 6 grandchildren. His farm was also the main source of income, sustaining the town's development. While everyone was mourning, Jackie noticed that the beekeeper, a rare sight, had also left Spider Island to attend. This further reinforced her suspicions. So after the ceremony ended, she directly asked the beekeeper if Kevin was his biological son. The beekeeper's expression changed drastically. He didn't deny it. Instead, he questioned how she knew. Before he could answer, his assistant interrupted their conversation. Shortly after the beekeeper left, Dany suddenly got into an argument with everyone. He sped away. Jackie chased after him and found out that his pent-up emotions had finally exploded. He intended to go to the island to settle the score with the beekeeper. He feared the situation would become irreversible. Jackie asked Bevon's niece to take her to the island by boat. By the time they approached the log cabin, it was late at night. Dany held his shotgun and muttered to himself. He knew why the beekeeper often appeared around the swing. It was actually to meet and play with Kevin in that forest. Dany raised his gun and aimed it at the beekeeper, but ultimately lacked the courage to pull the trigger. Finally, he put the gun to his own throat. Jackie rushed forward to reassure him, telling him that sometimes blood ties weren't as important as the bond between them. This gradually calmed his heart. Eric arrived at the log cabin just in time. Taking advantage of Dany's momentary lapse of attention, Eric quickly disarmed him. The situation finally calmed down. Taking advantage of the opportunity, the beekeeper explained to Jackie that on the day her granddaughter disappeared, he was near the swing because he had arranged to meet Kevin, and he hadn't actually seen her granddaughter at all. The entire forest was deserted. Jackie became even more confused. That year, all 6 of the Bevon grandchildren had claimed to have seen her granddaughter playing on the swing in the forest. Upon returning to town, Eric seemed to understand that no matter what he said, Jackie wouldn't give up the investigation. Currently, most of the clues she had found matched the autopsy results. Therefore, he put aside his animosity and invited her to cooperate in the investigation and share the clues. Dany, knowing Eric was searching for the landfill, provided a crucial clue as a thank you for them bringing her husband home. On Mr. Bevon's farm, there was an old landfill where a lot of waste seemed to be buried. Hearing this, the two didn't dare delay a second. That very night, they rushed to the landfill she had indicated. Sure enough, they found a large amount of industrial waste there. Could this be the initial scene of Kevin's death? Why would Kevin travel such a long distance to get here and wait until dawn? Eric ordered someone to test the caustic soda content in the industrial waste. Before the results came in, he went to the kindergarten to find Jackie to conduct an interrogation of James with her. First, Eric took a sample from James's mouth. Then he asked where the boy had gone with Kevin on Thursday after school. Hearing this question, James became very tense. He bowed his head in silence, as if avoiding something. Jackie advised that discussing the loss of a close friend could be difficult, but only in this way could the police find the truth. James finally mustered the courage to confess that Kevin had recently been dreaming of a black pig attacking him. Their teacher, Jack, had taught him that the best way to dispel a nightmare was to bravely confront it. So, on that day after school, Kevin said he wanted to go find the black pig. The two boys parted ways at the street corner. When Eric asked James where Kevin had been, he resisted again. James's mother, worried, suggested ending the interrogation, but Eric refused to give up. He insisted that James had said he would go to Bevon's farm with Kevin. So, did Kevin go there on the day of the crime? With this clue, Eric quickly took his assistant to Bevon's farm, but Bevon denied it. He explained that every time Kelvin came, he would greet him first, except on the day of the crime. Therefore, Kevin absolutely could not have been there. He was very firm and did not allow the police to question anyone in the house. However, his youngest son, a tall, thin man, secretly asked the inspector how long the industrial waste disposal would last. Clearly, the landfill being far from the farm wouldn't affect the business. Why was he worried? The assistant suddenly asked about a chubby worker who had accompanied the tall, thin man 3 years prior to his granddaughter's disappearance. This chubby worker had said he wanted to provide evidence, but unfortunately, he didn't know the local language. After finding an interpreter, he regretted it and refused to provide any evidence. Since he was already at the farm, the assistant thought he might be able to meet him through the tall, thin man's words. They knew he frequented a bar, so Eric went there immediately. But no matter what Eric asked, the chubby worker kept repeating, "I don't understand English." However, judging by his evasive expression, it seemed he didn't not understand, but rather didn't want to. At this moment, Bevon's family entered. The fat worker's face showed a fleeting look of panic as he hastily fled the gambling den. Meanwhile, before going to search for Bevon's niece, she was different from the other nieces. She was the only one who had a good relationship with Jackie and expressed remorse for Kevin's death. This made a suspicious person like Jackie wonder if her remorse, besides for Kevin, also extended to her niece. Under Jackie's relentless questioning, Bevon's niece admitted they had lied about the truth of the day of the disappearance. 3 years earlier, the 6 nieces had taken Jackie's niece to the old stone quarry to play. At that time, they always teased, threatened, and forced her to do things she didn't want to do. She endured it all because she wanted to fit in. Bevon's niece led Jackie to a tractor in the old stone yard and explained that on the day her niece disappeared, after 6 children had teased her, they had left her there. She had been missing ever since. Bevon's niece also heard that the police were investigating the farm, but she assured them that no one in the family had harmed anyone. Kevin certainly hadn't been to the farm before he died. Jackie told her that all this evidence had been provided by James, but Bevon only replied that children often lie. As Jackie left, she passed a forensic investigator in protective gear. A sudden realization dawned on her. She grabbed her watercolors and ran straight to her older sister and brother-in-law's house. What if she was wrong? What if the person in the drawing wasn't the beekeeper, but some other worker in protective gear? But Jackie's older sister thought she was too stressed out. Jackie was completely consumed by grief over her niece's disappearance and Kevin's death. Her sister advised Jackie not to get involved in anything related to the case anymore. Not receiving any understanding, Jackie sadly left. That same night, a masked man secretly broke into the house of the marker man. When awakened, he was frightened and immediately called the police. Eric arrived and managed to drive the intruder away. He suspected the marker man was from out of town. After a murder, the town's residents would collectively ostracize outsiders. The masked man probably wanted to find evidence to prove his guilt. In any case, the place was no longer safe. Eric arranged for the man to stay in the same hotel as him. Before going to bed, Jackie came to discuss whether they could combine the 2 cases for investigation. Currently, they had no direct clues proving Kevin had also been to the old landfill before his death. Eric, feeling helpless, politely declined the offer. After careful consideration, he cautiously asked Jackie if she was pregnant. Her posture and movements were subtly different from those of an average person. Jackie was surprised that, despite her excellent disguise, she had still been discovered. She warned him not to reveal the news, as the entire town, including the child's biological father, was unaware. Late that night, the inspector received a call from his assistant at the old landfill. They had unearthed a body wrapped in waterproof cloth, and judging from the familiar red sweater underneath, the deceased was Jackie's niece, who had been missing for 3 years. Eric, with a heavy heart, informed Jackie. At this point, her grief reached its peak, but she didn't cry hysterically as expected. Instead, she repeatedly said, 3 years. It turns out she's been buried in that cold underground all along. The assistant reported that the lack of caustic soda at the landfill might need to be reconsidered. It wasn't the primary crime scene, but Eric believed Kevin had been exposed to industrial waste before his death, and his niece Jackie's body had also been found at the the same industrial waste landfill. This was the common thread. They had no choice but to combine the two cases to investigate the two workers. Late that night, the assistant received an email from the lab containing a short brown strand of hair found on Kevin that partially matched James's, possibly belonging to a male relative of James's. The only person who fit this description was the boy's uncle. Just as Eric was about to leave to gather evidence, an unexpected event occurred. Mr. Bevon voluntarily went to the police station to confess. Bevon stated that the farm's business had been in serious decline for the past 3 years, making it extremely difficult to maintain operations. Furthermore, he was accused of someone secretly dumping industrial waste into his old quarry. When he went to check, he found Jackie's granddaughter covered in burns from industrial debris. She was lying in the pile of garbage. By the time he picked her up, she had long since passed away. So he wrapped her body in a waterproof tarp and buried her in the garbage. The police asked him why he did this. He explained that the farm was the life's work of 7 generations of his family. Once something happened and the police sealed it off, the pain would be 1,000 times worse than losing his own life. Eric continued to ask who else was present at the scene and heard about it. Bevon pursed his lips and insisted that only he knew about it. Early the next morning, his assistant obtained a DNA sample from James. Eric immediately handed it over to the forensic team for testing. At the same time, the forensic team also brought the autopsy report of Jackie's granddaughter. The girl's body, unusually preserved in scrap materials, was mummified and had severe burns in her lungs. Examination revealed dirt and plastic particles in the tissue at the back of her neck, along with bruises left by fingers. She had been forced to suffocate by having her head pressed into the pile of scrap. The killer's method was no different from Kevin's case. The person the police needed to arrest was the same. After saying goodbye to the forensic team, Eric found the Bevon family in a bar. Bevon had now confessed, and Eric had also discovered that the masked intruders were Bevon's nephews. If they still refused to tell the truth, he had every reason to arrest them all. Seeing this, Bevon's daughter-in-law quickly explained that her nephews were simply worried about Kevin's death. The only person they suspected was the man who had come from elsewhere to guard the marker. That's why they wanted to go to his house to look for clues. To dispel suspicion from his family, the tall, thin son admitted that the farm's profits had been very poor in recent years. He had secretly leased the old quarry several years prior to the incident, using it as a dumping ground for industrial waste. However, this business ceased after the night Jackie's niece disappeared. He also never took charge of the daily operations. Did he not manage anything else? When Eric questioned him further, he consistently maintained a complete lack of knowledge. However, based on the tall, thin man's testimony, it can be confirmed that Bevon confessed to illegally dumping industrial waste to cover up for his son. Furthermore, when Eric returned to the police station, he observed Bevon's trembling hands. He was not strong enough to strangle the two victims and drown or suffocate them. Therefore, he was not involved in the case. His blind confession wasted valuable investigation time. When Eric returned to the motel, the forensic team called to report that James's uncle's DNA sample perfectly matched the short brown hair found on the body. He had just hung up when he unexpectedly ran into the town crier. The crier reminded him that a devastating storm was expected in 48 hours, capable of destroying the entire town. He advised evacuating all residents, but Eric was at a loss. Asking them to leave the town where they depended for survival was probably impossible. Eric then confronted James's uncle about the hair and his alibi. The uncle claimed he had attended a town meeting on the day of the crime. However, a witness saw him leave early, so where had he gone? He then claimed he had gone out to meet Jackie. It turned out Jackie hadn't mentioned their secret relationship in her testimony. It was then that Eric learned he was the biological father of the baby Jackie was carrying. Back at the field police station, the assistant reported a new lead. The obese worker had been transferring large sums of money, far exceeding his salary. With Eric's permission, the assistant went to visit the obese worker alone. At first, he pretended not to understand, trying to avoid trouble. The assistant empathized and told him about his mother, who also used the excuse of not understanding to avoid unnecessary problems. Driven by family ties, the assistant managed to open the obese worker's heart. The assistant recounted many family stories to break down his defenses. He confessed that he felt the assistant was a good person and was willing to share some of the information the assistant wanted to know. In reality, the money he had was hush money. Someone didn't want the industrial waste scandal to be exposed. Over the past few days, he had secretly investigated and discovered that every Thursday, a truck carrying industrial waste would enter the town at low tide. Coincidentally, it was Thursday. The chubby worker told his assistant to wait by the seawall, certain they would find what they were looking for. However, by the time Eric received the news and rushed there, the high tide had submerged the main road. They couldn't wait for the scrap metal truck. The assistant decided to return returned to the old road to look for the chubby worker and consider whether he might be out. Eric also took Jackie along to search in bars. Along the way, the two confided in each other about the missing person case from 3 years ago. Jackie expressed that her telling Eric about her older sister's anger towards her niece wasn't just a statement from one police officer to another, but a heartfelt lament between friends. She genuinely considered him a friend. It was only regrettable that she hadn't yet received an apology from him. After listening to her story, he emotionally recounted a childhood tale about a close friend he had made a mistake with. He hadn't had a chance to apologize before that friend's untimely death. In the adult world, sometimes a few words aren't necessary to express remorse. A few words are enough. He apologized, and Jackie accepted. However, tonight, something unexpected happened. Someone discovered the drowned body of the overweight worker in the sea. By the time people pulled him out, he was already a cold corpse. A storm was approaching, cutting off the main road. Forensic experts couldn't reach the body for an autopsy. Everyone knew that the overweight worker had been murdered to cover up the crime because he talked too much. Currently, perhaps only he knew where the scrap metal would be taken to be processed after it was brought back to town. If they waited until tomorrow night for the storm to wash away all the evidence, it would be too late. So Eric decided to wait until morning to examine the fat worker's trailer. Meanwhile, on her way home, Jackie happened to encounter the strange man who kept muttering, "Why is there another death?" The previous victim was Kevin too. Although he had argued with Kevin, he had tried to apologize to the boy. Jackie didn't pay too much attention to what he said. Worried that he was wandering around outside and it wouldn't be safe for him, she kindly drove him home. But another unexpected event occurred. The next day, the fat worker's mobile home was set on fire. By the time Eric and his assistant arrived, the vehicle and all the evidence inside had been burned to ashes. Only then did Jackie vaguely remember the strange man's words from the night before. She rushed to ask what he meant by apologizing to Kevin. Did he mean that on Thursday, after kindergarten, the day of the murder, he had followed Kevin again, or seen the boy? The eccentric man admitted that, fearing trouble and harm to himself, he and her sister had lied in their statement, claiming they hadn't directly attended the town meeting, but had followed Kevin to apologize. However, Kevin was with James at the time, so no one paid attention. Jackie continued to ask how far he had followed Kevin before leaving. Following that small path, it wasn't far from where she found Kevin. But if the eccentric man's statement was true, Jackie would face a new problem. James had stated in his testimony that he and Kevin had parted ways at the street corner on the day of the crime. Clearly, he was lying. Because a storm was approaching, people were rushing to Bevon's farm to prepare for shelter. Jackie also found James in the crowded car. She pressed him for answers urgently, her voice hurried. James, already resistant to the idea, was even more unwilling to speak. Jackie refused to give up and pressed James, asking if Kevin and the boy hadn't gone to Bevon's farm. Where had they gone? James was getting impatient. He confessed that he really didn't want his uncle to get into trouble. It was his uncle who had warned Kevin not to go looking for the black pig. Otherwise, if the pig got angry, the tide would rise and Kevin would drown. Jackie was shocked. What reason would James's uncle have to threaten a child? The only logical explanation was that the place Kevin and James were going to was hiding some kind of secret. But no matter how much Jackie questioned James, he refused to reveal where they had gone that day. He even became agitated, shouting and demanding to get out of the car. Hearing the commotion, James's mother and Jackie's older sister rushed over, angry that she was using such extreme methods to pressure a child. Eric discovered a patch of land with signs of being dug up near the ruins of the mobile home. Beneath the surface lay a considerable amount of well-preserved documents. At first glance, they all seemed to relate to industrial waste. Among them was a map marking the burial location of Jackie's granddaughter. This was likely the result of the fat worker's secret investigation. It seemed he knew quite a lot. Security cameras near the car could store footage for 24 hours. After Eric extracted the footage, he discovered that yesterday morning, a tall, thin man had come looking for the fat worker, but no one answered, so he left. Later that evening, a man in black arrived. Shortly after, the car burst into flames. The camera only captured the figure hastily fleeing. Based on the man's build, he appeared to be quite stout and not very tall. This ruled out the possibility that the tall, thin man had disguised himself and returned to the scene to commit the crime. But strangely, when Eric went to the Bevon farm to find the tall, thin man, he discovered that he had secretly left without his family's knowledge. They fled at this crucial moment. Eric couldn't help but suspect that if he had contracted the landfill a few years ago, he might now be responsible for burying the newly transported waste. Even if he wasn't the mastermind, he couldn't escape suspicion of being an accomplice. After hearing Eric's analysis, Bevon understood that the matter was too serious. There were people he couldn't protect anymore, no matter how hard he tried. He had to admit that most of the confessions he'd heard came from the tall, thin man. 3 years ago, the tall, thin man had woken Bevon up in the middle of the night and said that he and the fat worker had seen Jackie's niece's body in the landfill. For the sake of their families and the farm, all three had quietly chosen to bury the body, but Bevon insisted to Eric that the hush money was absolutely not given to the fat worker. The inspector and Jackie exchanged clues they had each found. On the way, Jackie happened to meet the tall, thin man's son. The boy, with a worried expression, said that despite the storm, his father was still determined to find a boat to leave. He didn't know what to do. Hearing this, Jackie immediately rushed to the dock. At that moment, dark gray clouds were hanging heavy over the sea, as if brewing an even more devastating disaster. By the time Jackie found the tall, thin man at the dock, the dark clouds had already gathered above them. The tall, thin man dared not face Jackie's questioning. He bowed his head, struggling with his emotions for a long time, before finally admitting that he was the one who had decided to bury her granddaughter. When he found her, she was already dead. Someone must have killed her before they arrived, and that same person had given the fat worker money to silence him, and then cruelly murdered him when he dared to speak up. That was why the tall, thin man had fled. He feared he would be the next victim. Having said those words, he boarded the small boat and headed straight towards the eye of the storm, ignoring Jackie's attempts to stop him without looking back. When the inspector arrived, he was enraged by Jackie's impulsiveness. He assumed the tall, thin man had fled because he couldn't bear the pressure any longer. He blamed Jackie for everything. He inadvertently revealed that the short brown hair found on Kevin belonged to James's uncle. Based on this clue, he could easily link him to the murder. If it weren't for Jackie, he would have arrested James's uncle for questioning long ago. Fate always repeats the same problems until you solve them. 3 years ago, the inspector accused Jackie's older sister. Now he's accusing her lover. All of them are the people she loves most. She is forced to spin in the vortex of fate, facing it again and again. After Jackie left, the assistant went to the dock to meet with the inspector. To get more clues, the assistant showed the fat worker's cousin the documents found under the mobile home, but the cousin picked up a receipt and said he had just picked it up. It was the weekly delivery record for the Seawall. At low tide on Thursday, the signatory was James's uncle. Everything connected in an instant. The goods James's uncle signed for every Thursday must be the waste delivered by a truck. A flash of insight struck Eric. Finally, he figured out where the waste was hidden. He drove to the Seawall construction site. A sudden storm seemed to want to engulf the town. The residents had taken shelter at Bevon's farm. At that moment, James's mother discovered he had disappeared. Meanwhile, Jackie returned to James's house and waited for him in silence. She couldn't believe that the man she loved harbored such a complicated secret. It wasn't until she saw him remove his protective suit in front of her that countless questions exploded in her mind. But at that moment, both of them received news of James's disappearance. He had no time to explain further. He claimed the most urgent matter was finding James before the town was destroyed. But Jackie chased after him, insisting that if he didn't confess the truth, she wouldn't move a muscle in the pouring rain. So he had to admit that he had been helping recycle waste, crushing it and mixing it into the cement used to build the seawall. After getting into the car, he admitted to using the legend of the black pig to scare Kevin because he didn't want the boy to wander around and discover the secret of transporting waste. Jackie asked him why he hadn't mentioned the short brown hair. He helplessly justified it by saying it was simply because she had never trusted him. He had known she was pregnant for months. He had waited for her to speak up first, but she remained silent. This made him feel that he was fundamentally uncared for. He was merely a tool for her amusement when she was bored. His existence had finally been acknowledged. Although he didn't show it outwardly, he felt a constant sense of relief. He told her that the real mastermind behind everything was Jackie's sister's husband. At the same time, Eric had infiltrated deep into the Seawall construction site. The area was filled with industrial barrels of waste. Just being there for a short while made his throat itch uncontrollably. They could hardly imagine the unimaginable consequences if the tide were to collapse the seawall and these wastes were swept into the town. Eric also found fragments of blue debris that hadn't completely dissolved in a sealed room. The material perfectly matched Kevin's missing blue rain boots. The culprit must have destroyed the evidence. At this point, Eric immediately understood who could be so brazen. There was only one person on the construction site: his older sister, Jackie's husband, the site manager. But as Eric delved deeper into the investigation, he found the man hiding in the shadows. Suddenly, he lunged out, attacking Eric and trapping him inside a room. Seawater poured in relentlessly through the window. He would soon drown there. The man left the construction site and returned home to meet his wife. But Jackie was one step ahead. She recounted the entire incident to her sister. Her sister then remembered that on Thursday afternoon, when Kevin's incident occurred, her husband had arrived in the middle of a meeting. So where had he been before that? Faced with the questioning of the others, Eric's emotions were in turmoil. His hand, gripping the fruit knife, trembled uncontrollably. He pushed his wife, who was blocking his way, aside and hastily ran away. His wife, truly worried, chased after him. Meanwhile, the seawater had already flooded more than half the room. Eric could only barely stand on tiptoe, gasping for thin air. Fortunately, James had also arrived at the construction site. James followed Eric's cries for help and found the locked room. After both of them were safe, Eric asked James what he was doing there. Eric handed James over to the rescue team. While continuing his search around town, he encountered Jackie's eldest sister. Only then did he understand what had happened. However, when he returned to the house to check, James's wound was still bleeding. His face was increasingly pale. Jackie learned from her eldest sister that her brother-in-law had fled towards the swamp. She decided to go there as well to settle things with him. Before leaving, she instructed Eric to take good care of James's uncle. After she left, James's uncle couldn't rest easy, leaving her alone to face the killer, so he followed her. Jackie found her brother-in-law holding a knife, preparing to end his own life of crime. Eric had also just arrived at the scene. The words he uttered were truly heartbreaking. Starting 3 years ago, he had secretly bought up the waste dumped at the old rocky area and dumped it all into the Seawall. The cause of death for Jackie's niece and Kevin 3 years ago was that they accidentally discovered the secret about this waste, and he covered up the evidence. If it weren't for the fact that both of them left behind the same painting before their deaths, Jackie probably wouldn't have investigated this far. He said that before they died, both children called out Jackie's name, as if they believed that no matter how dangerous the situation, the person they admired and respected most would come to save them. Hearing his words, Jackie felt a pang of pain. She hadn't been able to save the two children in time. She had betrayed their trust. The remorse threatened to drive her insane, yet he was still justifying himself, saying he didn't intend to kill them. But the two children had suffered severe burns from the scrap metal. Even with emergency treatment, their chances of survival were very low, so he thought it would be better to give them a quick death. That would be better for everyone. Seeing him becoming increasingly agitated, even raising the knife again to do something reckless, Jackie immediately rushed forward to stop him. At the same time, she unleashed unprecedented strength, forcefully pushing him underwater. Eric stood beside them, coldly observing. Sympathy should only be reserved for the weak. As for a cruel demon who had taken lives like this, he didn't even bother to lift a finger to stop him, because first and foremost, he was a human being, and only then a police officer. But in the end, Jackie still grabbed him, pulled him out of the water without hesitation, and slapped him repeatedly across the face. She understood deep down that for a villain, death was far too easy. He had to live to atone for all the crimes he had committed. After the storm subsided and everything calmed down, the town, devastated by the sea, was reduced to rubble. Everything needed to be rebuilt. So did people's hearts. Her brother-in-law was being held in custody. The assistant and Eric would wait until the roads were reopened to transport him to court. Jackie had truly accepted her relationship with James's uncle. She told the doctor treating James's wounds that she was pregnant. This would finally be made public, just as James's uncle had hoped. Bevon, who previously only cared about his own interests, now selflessly uses his farm as a shelter, providing accommodation for the villagers. Only the tall, thin man never returned. Perhaps he successfully escaped, or perhaps he was swept away by the storm and will never be able to come back. The film ends here. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, and see you again.